Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is week 7 of the Introduction to the Culture of the 19th Century, and today we're going to talk about family and education in the 19th century, mostly in the Victorian period. If you want more on that subject, there is a whole course that I'll be giving next semester called The History of the Family in the 18th and 19th Century. So what I'm going to give you today is just some sort of introduction, or perhaps the most important information regarding family life and social rituals and education, mostly in the Victorian period. If you would like to read on that matter, perhaps to later write on that matter in your final essay, Sally Mitchell has 2 chapters on that. I'll be using some of the information there, but as you'll see, there is a lot more for you to find. So one is called Family and Social Rituals, and then Education. There is also another chapter called The Material Substance of Private Life: House, Food and Clothes. A very interesting thing, which is currently more the scope of the other course, but if you're interested, by all means go ahead and read it. There are some of the books that I don't really have in ebook form, so you'd need to go to the library to read them. So once again, Walter Houghton, The Victorian Frame of Mind, and there is another book by Paula Bartley called The Changing Role of Women, and there are some dates. I guess it's 1815 to 1914 or something like that. So anyway, The Changing Role of Women in the 19th Century, and they all have chapters on love, family, marriage, and such things. There are also some interesting documentaries, and I'll talk about them in a little moment. One more book stemming from those documentaries by Sarah Goodman. This is the lady behind the documentaries such as The Victorian Farm, or Full Steam Ahead, and The Victorian Pharmacy. So some of those documentary shows in which they recreate the reality of daily life in the 19th century. And the book that I would like to suggest to you is called How to Be a Victorian. It's also about the daily life and everyday living in the Victorian period. So perhaps as a start, it's good to connect it with the previous week, that is Victorian values, how their concepts of love and family correspond to the values they believed in. Of course they do, a lot. If you remember our discussion of Victorian morality and the concept of virtues, family and let's say private sexual life are very important for the Victorian middle class understanding of virtue, especially for women, with the division of spheres, which is of course most expressed in private life, but not only, everywhere. If you look at the working environment, if you look at the legal situation, the reality of life for men and women was very different. But of course the concept of love and family are very important for Victorian morality. They are, you might say, the hallmark of Victorian morality. Walter Houghton describes Victorian definition of love as passion tempered by reverence and confined to the home and marriage. So as you can see, it wasn't very unbound like the romantics would have it. If you know anything about the love lives of the romantic poets such as Shelley or Byron, they did not believe in marriage, although they got married at least for a time. They believed in what they called free love, that is, let's say, unrestrained expression of personal passions. For the Victorians, who are more influenced by the middle class ideal, this is too much. They still keep the element of passion or perhaps mutual respect and mutual choice. This is an interesting thing. In the Victorian period, the concept of arranged marriages, so basically forcing young people to marry someone who is chosen by the families, by their parents and other important members of their families, is no longer seen as standard. This is something verging on the immoral. So the new morality, the Victorian morality, favors love matches. So you should be able to choose who you marry, but of course you should choose wisely, and you should choose the people who would be accepted by your family anyway. So this was the case with Queen Victoria, if you remember. She chose Prince Albert, but her family really made sure that she fell in love with the right person. So if you did not, if you wanted to marry somebody your family would not accept, this might still get you in trouble. Probably at the end of the 19th century, much less severely than at the beginning of it, but it'd still be a problem. Marriage was seen for both men and women as one of the most important things in their lives, even more so for women. For middle class and upper class women, this was for a long time, until the middle of the 19th century, the best and sometimes even the only, I would say, option in life in terms of getting financial security, getting any sort of stability. There were very limited propositions for middle and upper class women who wanted to work. We'll talk about it when we talk about Victorian work, but just to indicate, for middle class impoverished women, those who were widows, those who were orphans, so they didn't have a husband or a father to support them, until the middle of the 19th century, basically the only real option was to become a governess. So to be employed as a private teacher for children of a richer family. This is really the only option. Then after the Crimean War, with the success of Florence Nightingale, perhaps medical nursing is an option. Perhaps for some rare women who are very talented and or very lucky, they could earn money by writing. So we have, of course, lady novelists, and some of them are quite successful, but very often, more often than not, especially in the first half of the 19th century, they have support elsewhere. They are either married or they are supported by the families, by their brothers, like the case of Jane Austen, for example. So it's not a good job that would keep you secure. There are women who are journalists who start getting these jobs, and of course with the progress of the 19th century, these opportunities are more and more numerous, as well as the opportunities for education, middle range and higher education for girls and young women, also with the prospect of getting a profession in the end. But we may safely say that a spinster, an unmarried woman, of a certain age, which in the Victorian period would be around mid-20s. So if you were not married by your mid-20s, you could be declared a spinster by your family and definitely treated as a burden, mostly financial, but also emotional burden on your family. So marriage was the most important thing for a woman. It really signified that she matured, that she found her place in life, and adhering to the morality concerning private life, sexuality, of course, being a faithful wife to her husband, being a good mother to her children, and being a good manager to her servants becomes a very important thing. For men, marriage is also important, but not as a matter of being a complete life failure if you didn't. Let's say having some sort of profession and employment was more important, but being married for a man also signified maturity, respectability, dependability, and could even positively influence the treatment of a man as an employee, as a business partner, so even have a positive impact on his professional life. We have a lot of connection between morality and Victorian values and the family life and the married life. As Sally Mitchell says, the Victorian family, mostly meant by it would be the nuclear family, father, mother and children living together. It was the foundation of Victorian values, and it became increasingly idealized during the Victorian period. So this was the ideal represented in culture, in paintings, in poetry. We mentioned last week this very famous poem by Coventry Patmore entitled The Angel in the House. So a woman was supposed to be the angel in the house, to fulfill her role as a wife and mother. Before her, any other roles. She could have other roles. Of course, she was still a daughter to her parents. She could have some work, especially if she was, let's say, from the lower middle class. She could engage in social life, especially the charity. But her morality as a wife and mother was the most important thing. Of course, the royal family provided a kind of role model for that. Queen Victoria, Prince Albert and their 9 children were very often portrayed in art, in photography, in the newspapers and magazines as the model family, as the perfect family. Which, well, was true to a certain extent. Definitely they loved each other very much, but for example, in reference to maternity and her maternal duties, Queen Victoria was not a model. She, you might say, followed the old system in which most of the real work and childcare was done by servants. So as you can read in Sally Mitchell's book, this would be true still for very many Victorian families, especially the families with enough means to employ servants to look after the children. So the ideal was one thing, and the reality of daily life was very often something else, where the children didn't, in which the children didn't see their parents a lot during the day, even the mothers, but they spent quite a lot of time with the servants. So the next thing, which is very typical for Victorian households and Victorian private life, is of course the servants, the live-in servants. The numbers of them depended on the material status of the family, but if you remember our discussion of social classes, You couldn't really consider yourself to be a member of the middle class if you did not employ any servants. So if you could afford one, you would employ one, a maid of all work. If you wanted to do just the managerial duties around the house, you would probably need around 3 servants in the Victorian period, especially in the city, with the coal dust generating a lot of dust and soot and of course somebody needed to clean all that and cook from scratch and do the laundry and mind the children. And on average, the Victorian families had many children, around 5 or 6 on average, which means there were many families, like 1 in 10 would have 10 children or more. So it was very difficult to care for such a large family without any servants. So it's not even 1 in 10; it's 1 in 5. Goodness me! So that's quite a lot. So you have to consider the completely different living conditions, without hot water, even if they had running water in the house, without electricity, without the majority of modern labor-saving devices and household appliances. And here comes the documentary I would like to recommend to you. It's one of the first reconstruction programs. It is called 1900 House. So, like a modern family, it was made at the turn of this century. I guess it was in 1999, and they kind of moved a family of volunteers, a modern family of volunteers, back in time to 1900, so the late Victorian period. You can find this documentary on YouTube. I will give you the links as well if you want to. This is a 4-part documentary. In the first part, they actually reconstruct the fittings of a house, a regular house. There are many houses like this surviving until today, but they have been gradually equipped with all the modern appliances. The house used for this experiment is kind of retrograded. It's fitted with all the late Victorian appliances they could find, and all the modern things like electricity or hot water are removed. So they do it in the first episode. Then a family of modern people, so a husband, wife, and 4 children, 1 teenager, then I guess she's 16-year-old, and then 2 younger teenagers, twin girls, and a younger boy. They move in and they live in this house for 3 months. Some of the members of the family, like the kids who are still at school, they go out to school, and they only return home to the late Victorian reality. But especially the lady of the house, the mother of the family, stays in this house most of the day and has to maintain the daily running of the house. And this is very interesting to see because this was her idea to join the program, and she was a kind of history buff. She loved history, she loved visiting historical houses, and then she ended up living for 3 months in a late Victorian home, cooking and cleaning and washing and doing everything without basic amenities today. And you can see how difficult and physically hard it is for her and other family members. Also, not only the physical reality of life, but also the social norms. They are subjected to some late Victorian social norms, so they have to dress in a Victorian way. They have to participate in some, let's say, carefully guided socializing with some experts as house guests. They have to follow the etiquette rules. So if you want to see a modern family, late 20th century family trying to cope with the reality of living 100 years before, this is a very interesting show to watch. So I will not tell you much. I will not tell you what was the greatest disappointment and how they coped and what aspect of life they found the most difficult. Perhaps when we have a live meet we can discuss that. It's a good idea. So what else about Victorian family life? Religious observance was quite important part of middle class life, or generally life in Victorian England, so something that we have already discussed a little last week. But at the family level, it could mean, for example, a custom of daily prayers that was still quite popular in early Victorian period in the 1830s and 1840s. This was a relic of older times, but it survived in some of the homes, especially those following the Low Church version of Anglican religion. So before breakfast, the entire household, including the servants, so the parents, the children would gather in the dining room or a parlor, and the father, the master of the house, would officiate during a short prayer. He would read a passage from the Bible or some prayer book. Everybody would kneel and say a prayer. Very often this would relate to instructing the women, the children and the servants to stick to their place in the family hierarchy and basically in the social hierarchy. Later, in the second half of the 19th century, this is replaced by another form of family religious observance. The prayers led by the father are no longer popular or as popular as before, and they are replaced by mothers praying with their children before bedtime. So mothers basically taking on the role of instructor, also moral instructor, teaching children the prayers and supervising their prayers in the evening. The fathers were exempted from that, and this could really show that the role of the woman in the household was more and more important, and she was revered as this angelic creature, especially by the children. So this is what you would have. Another thing that most people think were very common, but Sally Mitchell says they weren't, were family meals. Very often children ate separately. If they had a nursemaid, so if they had a nanny, they would eat separately. However, the Sunday was a family day. They would go to church together, they would have meals together, and children would normally spend more time with their families. In, again, some more strictly religious homes, and especially those following the Low Church evangelical rules, there would be a restriction on the types of toys that the children could use on Sunday. There was one toy allowed, and at this point I normally ask the students what this toy could be, and I guess this is what I will do. So there will be a little question in the forum, like what was the only toy allowed in most religious Victorian homes on a Sunday? Let me tell you, it was a toy connected somehow with religion. I'm not saying anything more, so that's a question for you to answer, and yeah, we'll continue in a moment.